Hey guys, so this is Sahil and welcome to the third session brought to you by SIAM VIT. So today we're going to be continuing the app dev session. So we have already learned about the basics about app dev. We have already learned about the front end about app dev as well in the past two sessions. So in today's session, we're going to learn a little bit more into detail with how you can store data in your Android application, how you can save it, how you can use it every time you reopen your app or something like that. So we're going to give you a slight introduction to databases and what they are and how you can use that to build your own application. And then we're going to go forward and try and implement a very simple application to try and use it. Uh, in today's session, we're going to be talking about making a notes app as well. So that is how we're going to show you the entire application of this database. So it might seem a little bit intimidating at first, but it won't be once you start working on it by yourself. So let's get into this session. So the first question that you can have in this point is, what is a database? So if you don't know the base about a database, this is it. A database is an organized collection of structured information or basically data, and a database is usually controlled by a database management system, or basically known as DBMS. So we have an entire subject on DBMS. It's an entire course, so we don't want to go into too much of details with that because that's a very big subject by itself. But all you need to know is something that can control a database can be called as a database management system, and you have a variety of functionalities under that particular system. So what do you say, what is a database? The data, the management system, and all the applications, which is what we're going to build. This is the stuff that we're going to build. The applications are what we're going to build. That along with the data and the management system together, all are just referred to the database. So that is what you could say is the database. It's the data, it's the data management system, and it's all the applications that are associated with them. So in today's session, we're going to be learning how to make a proper or a very good application to this particular task. So now, obviously, we're going to be talking about how to use it in Android. So we're going to just learn on what are the types of databases and what we're going to use. So there are many database options when you try to be an app developer. You have plenty of options as an app developer to choose where to store your data. So you have an option between taking a online database or just storing it offline. So I will tell you about each, and I will tell you what are the advantages on both, and also I will tell you what your options you have, right? The first option, the most popular option for database storage is Firebase, or let's say MongoDB for web developers, but generally it's Firebase. And the reason it's Firebase is provided by Google. It's a online database storing service provided by Google, which is free initially, but then you'll have to pay if it gets if you have a very large audience, you'll have to pay. But initially, it's completely free, so you can always use it for practice and trying out different apps. And pretty much, you can see a lot of tutorials on how to build a particular app using Firebase, because Firebase has a very simple implementation and a very good documentation that is maintained by Google themselves. That makes Firebase one of the best database storing services. And mind it, Firebase is a online database storage service. So we have Firebase as an option. We have AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, which is obviously provided by Amazon. We have MongoDB, we have Azure Mobile, we have Kinvi, we have IBM Bluemix. So these are all just names of online database storage services which you can use as an Android developer. There are even more services. There could be plenty of services, and every day obviously people are trying to get more and more database services out there. So you have plenty of options when it comes to being an Android developer to choose an online service. And what's going to be the advantage of using an online service? You can not only you can communicate between different devices. It's not going to be constrained to being a local device. You can pretty much use it for a huge variety of audience. I mean, you can connect your phone from India, let's say, to a person who's sitting all the way in Australia by using this online service, because he just has to download the data from the Firebase and you just have to upload it to the Firebase. So it's very simple, and that's why you can use an online database. So if you're going for a large scale app, like let's for example a food delivery app or a cinema ticket booking app, or in all these cases you will probably have to use Firebase, or not just Firebase, any online database. So what I'm trying to implement or just imply rather than a offline database which would be constrained to, let's say, just a particular local device. So what could be examples of an offline database? Right, that's exactly your question, right? So the offline database has plenty of examples. One of the most basic examples is SQLite database. So and that's what we're going to be using in today's session as well. We're going to be learning how to use SQLite database, what is SQLite database, and everything about SQLite database that could uh, get you started with it. It's going to be a pretty good session, and we're going to talk about all the basics, all the fundamentals. We're going to go into depth as well in certain subjects. We're going to be talking about a certain type of front end which is considered to be very difficult in Android development, but it's not too difficult if you just do it once or twice. If you just do it once, it's not going to be difficult anymore, because I initially found it as a little bit difficult, but then I just spent like 20 or 30 minutes on it, and then it became super easy after that. So it's something called recycler view for the people who are already familiar with AppDev. Uh, so the next thing that we're going to tell you is in the offline database, you have options like SQLite database. Like I said, you have, if you want to ask me another option, it could be shared preferences. So that is also something that is already available in your Android Studio. So it's kind of inbuilt into Android Studio. Yes, another thing about SQLite database that we're going to talk about is it is inbuilt into Android Studio. So before we get to that, let me just say why I'm using SQLite. So the exact reason is it is already inbuilt into Android Studio. It's already inbuilt into Android itself. So it's very easy to implement because it is already embedded into Android by default, which literally just makes it the most easiest thing to implement in Android itself. Something which wasn't embedded into the system would be much more difficult to implement, especially if it comes to an offline database. It would have been much more difficult to implement it if it wasn't embedded into the system itself. But in case of SQLite, it's already embedded into the system, which makes it very easy to implement. It has a lot of predefined functions, which also we're going to talk about a little bit. And in the second point, I've just given a link here. If you want to know more detailed information about SQLite and all the different functions, pretty much you will get to know most of this by the end of this session. But if you want to just refer something, here is a link that you can refer for your information, right? So the main reason we use SQLite in Android is because it's open source and it is embedded into Android by default, which makes it much easier for us to set it up and just use it, right? Okay, so like I said, there were different types of SQLite data, there are offline databases, including SQLite, including shared preferences. Now, you can ask me, where would I use a database like SQLite? Like when I have an option for an online database, why would I use something like SQLite? So the basic thing is, because it's open source, it's obviously going to be free for you, and you don't have to pay money for using it, and it's very efficient as well, especially if you're making some game which is like just constrained to your particular device. For example, I'm just going to take Subway Surfers, right? I'm not saying that it used SQLite, but it possibly can have, because I don't know about it. But the only thing I know that games like Subway Surfers or any game which is just local to your device. So if you've ever seen, unless you sync it up with, let's say, your Google Play account or something like that, if you're just playing Subway Surfers without any syncing up to any device or any account, you're still going to have a score. You're going to have the number of coins and all that. But as soon as you delete it from your phone and you reinstall it, all the data is going to be deleted, because you never stored it anywhere except, let's say, an SQLite database, which is only locally available. So if you're going to use it for games like Subway Surfers or Temple Run or something like that, which is very much local, and to be honest, Subway Surfers just implemented the Google sign-in later on to provide users multi-platform, multi-device functionality. But initially, it was just probably a SQLite database, which basically just stored data for your phone, and as soon as you uninstall the app, all the data just goes with it. And when you reinstall it, also your data is not going to generally come back. So it's going to store it as long as you have the app on your device. So this can be very efficient in certain cases where you don't need to store it online. You don't always have to store data online. So there are a lot of cases where you don't have to store it online, and probably the best case option that you'll have at that point of time would be using a SQLite database. Like I said, there are other offline databases, and a perfect example would be shared preference, which is again inbuilt into Android Studio. And there are functionalities for it which are already predefined, but we're not going to go into that. But you can use SQLite as a efficient source for AppDev. Now let's talk about what are the functionalities or the functions that are available for the SQLite database. So you have to be able to insert data into the SQLite. We're going to show you all of these tasks one by one while we're doing the coding, but Obviously you should be able to insert data into the SQLite, which is just insert any kind of information into that table, right? So SQLite is basically very similar to SQL. The commands are also very similar. You're just going to create a table and you're going to insert data into it, and then we're going to update data, we can delete data, we can do all those conditions. So you're obviously going to insert data into the table. You can select a particular data that you want to show. You can update the data, that is, if you want to update a certain row or a certain value or a certain attribute, you can use the update functionality given in this database. You can print out that updated value. So initially you had a value, you updated the value, you can print out the updated value. And last but not least, you can delete data from the SQLite as well. And let's just say that you wanted certain data to not be there anymore, or you just didn't want it to exist, you can just delete it as well. So we're going to use pretty much all of these functionalities in today's session of the app. And now I am going to just show you how this works in whole. Let's go to the Android Studio and let's see how we'll be able to implement all of this in Android Studio. Okay guys, so before I tell you how to use all this data in your database, I'm just gonna have to show you what we're gonna do and what we're trying to aim at. So we're just trying to make an app that looks pretty much like this. It's going to be a note app, which you can add a particular note into the app, you can use it, and you can edit the note, you can delete the note, and you can update the note. So these are the functionalities we're going to provide. So this is literally what we just talked about in the PPT. So initially this is going to be a main screen where you're going to be given a button, and as soon as you click the button, you can add a particular note. Initially, if there is nothing on the screen, if you haven't had any notes, let's say I want to write the title is song, and I just write something like Drake, so something like this, and I just click on save. It's going to say the note is saved, and it's going to take me to another activity or another screen, and it's going to give me this particular screen where the note that I just added is going to be at the top of the screen, and it's going to give me an option to share, it's going to give me an option to edit the note or delete the note. So if I click on the edit the note, you can see, as you can see, I can edit the note, and you can see the update option it says. So let us say Drake, and I say Travis or something like that, and if I click on update, you can see that it's been updated. And if I click on the delete, it's gonna just delete the note for me. If I click on the add item again, let's just do it again just to show you how it works. Okay, and if I want to add another note, it's also showing you a timestamp just on the bottom left. If I want to add another note, let's just say song 2, and then we write Travis or something like this. Click on no save, it's going to come on the next line basically. So this is what we call as a list view, and we've implemented this using a recycler view, which I'm going to be talking about later on in the session. But all you need to know is this is the basic functionality that we're trying to get using today's session, right? So let's get into Android Studio. Okay guys, so now we are in Android Studio, as you can see, and basically I've already made a couple of the activities, and the reason I did this is because if I didn't do this, because this app is quite in-depth, it would take up a lot of your time. I would not be able to finish it in an hour or whatever, because it would take just a lot of time. So I've written a bit of the code, not everything, but I will explain pretty much everything as we go through the session, so you should not be having too much of doubts. So initially from the front end session, you guys already know about how the front end works, how you can add buttons and how you can add text views and everything like that. So I've just created a relative layout, as you can see from the component tree. Just created a relative layout. I've added a floating action button, which is basically just a button itself. You just have to know that much about it. It looks pretty much like this. You would have seen it in a lot of apps where it's just, over here or something, but this is what you call as a floating action button, and it's pretty much given as an option as an Android Studio user. You can just take it from here, but yeah, I've just added that, and I've also added a text view underneath that action button. So you can pretty much figure it's very easy to constrain all these relatively. You can say that I have chosen the layout center horizontal is true. I have also chosen the color for the particular text. You can change that according to your wish. And if you want to add this particular button in between of this floating action button, you can just choose your drawable component and you can just choose the IC input, which is the predefined icon. It's already there in your system, so I haven't really taken it from the internet or anything. It's just there, so you can just choose that and it will come in the center of your floating action button. So this is the main activity screen, which is the first screen. It's going to come if there isn't any kind of data in your Android Studio project. If there is no data in your app, this is what is going to come as the initial screen. Now let's come to the code for this particular activity. So this is the activity, this is the Java file for this particular activity. So I'm just going to explain most of the code here and you will be able to understand most of it. So let's initially just talk about the definitions I've given here. I've just defined everything that is here. So let's just see. I have defined the floating action button globally in the sense I can access it anywhere in the program. So I've just defined it globally so that I can do that. I can access it anywhere in the class. So this is the floating action button, which is defined over here. The alert dialog, I'm going to tell you guys about what that is a little bit later. I've defined two variables for that. I've created a button, which is basically the save button. We're going to talk about that later as well. I've created the edit text, which is basically this particular edit text that we're going to talk about here, and which is going to be for the title. I'm sorry, let me just reopen that up. Activity. So I've created this edit text for the title of the particular note and also for the description of the particular note, and we're going to display both of these in an alert dialog. So you would have seen in the demonstration of how the app should look a particular pop-up. Every time I clicked add, it gave me a pop-up and it asked me what the title and the description was. So that pop-up in Android Studio is basically called a alert dialog. You can have different types of alert dialogs, but we're just gonna make a decently good looking alert dialog, and we're going to talk about that in today's session. So for that alert dialog, obviously you need the text, which is basically what the title of your note is going to be, and the description, which is what you want to store inside the note. So that is what I've defined over here, and the database helper is what we're going to be using to store it in the data. So this is something again which is predefined in Android Studio, and you just gonna have to call it like this, that is capital D database helper, and then you just call the variable name database helper, which basically has all the functionalities of this class database helper, and I can do anything with it. Now we are also going to create the database helper class. In the next part of the session, I'm going to tell you how I did that, and you guys will be able to understand. So let's not go too deep into this because I will tell you how to do this later on in the session. But you can see I've defined the floating apps button here. I've created a list view for storing the data in terms of a list. You would have seen that we store the data in the form of a list. Now logging is nothing but just showing it in Android Studio. So this is where all the logs come. This is something called logcat. So whatever you do in your program, it's going to show over here. So just the reason that people log is just to know if their program is working or not, or just to see if a particular piece of data is working properly or not. So just to see that, people use the logcat, and this is where all the data comes. It's pretty much right here. So you can do that if you want to log anything. So I'm doing that as well, and I've also set a on click listener for my floating action button. That is, as soon as the floating action button is clicked on, I want you to call this create dialog pop-up function, which I've defined later on, but I will tell you how that works. But basically I have just said that as soon as the floating action button has clicked, that is this centered button is clicked, a pop-up should appear which is asking the user to enter the title and enter the description of the particular note. So let's go a bit down and look at the create pop-up, which is basically the alert dialog right here. So we have all these options right here. You can see that I have this is the syntax for defining a alert dialog. A builder has already been defined earlier on top. You remember I defined it at the onCreate method, and you can just globally I've defined it, and this is how you can create your alert dialog builder. You have to define it in this way. I have also just defined the view, and I have defined the title text and the description text, which was defined earlier globally. I've defined the save button. That is, this button is going to appear once you enter the title and the description of your note. you have to obviously click on something to make sure that okay, this particular note is saved. So that button is the save button, and I have added a on click listener. That is, as soon as the save button is clicked, I am going to show you a toast that no, I'm sorry, as soon as the save button is clicked, it's gonna check for the in the on click method that if either the title is empty or the description is empty. That is basically saying, and in the sense both have to be filled, not even one, even if one of them is empty, it's not going to take you to the next activity. This and is just indicating that both of them have to be filled, none of it can be left empty, basically saying that as soon as somebody tries and clicks on the save button and the title and the description or even one of them is not filled, it will just show you a toast message that you have to enter the title and the description. And then this is the next syntax for using the builder, and I've just set a particular view. A view is basically how the builder should look. I've set the view for the builder as view itself, and I have created the dialog box using the syntax, and I'm trying to show the dialog box using the syntax. And this is another bypass activity. This is basically just letting me go to the next activity. So I'll just explain what this means. So initially I said that if there is nothing in this particular activity, if there is nothing on the, if I have not created a note beforehand, only and only then would I want the screen to come. Otherwise, obviously, it doesn't make sense in bringing up the screen, because this is like when there is no notes, I want you to show the screen. If there is some kind of note, then I would obviously want you to show those notes, which is what we're going to talk about later on. But in this list activity right here, but if there is no notes, I wouldn't want you to show me the list of notes, because there's nothing. So I would want you to show me an option for adding. There's literally what this is saying, that is, if it is greater than 0, then I want you to move to the next activity. Next activity is the list activity. That is the list activity class that we're going to talk about that over here. Okay, so this is the list activity class. So this basically says, if there is literally no note, if there is no note at all, that is greater than 0 in the sense if there is at least more than one note, then I want you to go to the next activity, that is go to the list activity, and whatever functionality I'm going to implement over here, I want you to do it, right? So literally just go to the next activity, and that's this meaning. So obviously if there is not even one note, what's going to happen, all these functionalities of the alert dialog, create pop-up, save notes, all that is going to come up. I'm going to tell you about that as well. But basically you just have to know that if I don't have even one element, then it's, if I have at least one element, if I have at least one note already in it, then it's going to go straight to the list activity rather than coming to this particular main activity, right? Okay, rather than, let me just say that it doesn't skip the main activity, it just doesn't show it. I mean, it loads up, but it's just going to bypass it, which is why I call the function as a bypass activity. It will load up, but this screen is going to load up just as soon after that, and it's going to happen in a matter of milliseconds, so you're not going to be able to see it, but basically that's what's going to happen. So let's come to the main activity, and let's see all these save note function, which is the last function available here. So basically this says is, as soon as I click on the save button, after I've entered the title and the description, I'm just going to show you how the pop-ups looks. So this is how the pop-up looked, right? So it'll give you the option to enter your note, the title over here, the description over here, and the save button. So as soon as I've set the title data, which I'm getting from the user. Earlier we have already defined everything for getting that, and you can see here I've just converted to a string, and I'm just trimming it down so that it doesn't exceed a certain length. So I'm setting the title to the node data model, which is what is the database. I am setting the description as well. I'm going to tell you how the node model is going to look because we have to define that class. We haven't gone there till now, but I will tell you how it works. Here all I'm doing is I'm just calling a particular object for that particular class. This is something that I've already taught you, how to create an object for a class. I've taught you this in the first session. But basically I'm going to try and access anything in this node model class that we're going to talk about. If you guys want to look right here, I haven't defined anything, but you can literally use anything that is available in your node model class in this particular class after calling the object over here. That's all I'm doing. I'm just trying to set the title for the node model, set the description for the node model. I'm adding that particular node to the database helper so that it shows up in your list activity over here. And then for some example, if a particular person does not want to add something, he just wants to remove that particular dialog box after the saving is done, for that we are using this functionality over here. And this is again predefined functionality. You can find this pretty much on Stack Overflow. If you just Google how to remove a dialog box after the activity, you will get this piece of code. And choose the activity where you want to indent it. So I'm obviously, after I save it, I would want to go to the list activity to show all the notes. So that's all I've done here. And dialog.dismiss is what pretty much removes the dialog from your screen, right? Now let's talk about the note model.java, which is where we're going to define the next piece of information for you guys. So in the note model, what we're going to do is we're going to have 4 variables defined initially globally. So let's just go through that. So I'm going to define a public, okay, let's define it private instead. Let's define it private because there isn't anything which can't access it, or there's no need for me to define it public for no reason. And the reason that I'm doing private, you might ask, and not public, is because, see, it doesn't require to be public. As long as it doesn't require to be public, there's no need for you to define something publicly, because if you do that, it's not wrong, it will still work, absolutely fine, but it's not a good way to code, right? Especially when you're trying to code something on, let's say, a large platform, or you're in some kind of competition where it's very judgy, people judge you a lot. It's good to get into practice of coding properly. So that's why I've used private here. So private string, and then I'm going to define something called title, which is going to be the title of the note. I'm also saying private string, and then I'm defining a description for the note, and then we're going to say private string, and then we're going to just say date that the note is added, so that it just as if you remember the preview that I showed, it also had the date on the bottom left, right? So I've just defined all of these functionalities globally in a class. So we have to also define a default constructor for the node model. So this is the syntax for a default constructor, or any constructor in a node model. So I've just defined that over here. I'm just going to give it a bit of space to make it look nice. Okay, now let's also now define a parameterized constructor, which is going to return the values whenever the object is called for this. So again, public node model, and now we're going to have some parameters while defining this particular thing. So it can't be default. So let's see, string, we're going to bring in an ID, which is basically the ID of the particular node. So each node will have its particular ID, which distinguish it from the other node. Let's say the first ID, the first node has an ID of 1, the second has 2 and 3 and 4. So each ID can access each individual node. So there's no complication when you comes to, let's say suddenly you want to access the second node. So it will go according to your ID. So we also have to define the title over here, literally just everything that we just defined earlier, string description, and the last and not least, string date that the note is added. So you can see Android Studio is helping me out a lot there, which is another advantage of this. So we're going to use this operator, which is something that you guys might not have heard till now, but we're just using this operator to indicate that, okay, I want to store the value of the string, whichever the user inputs, and I want to store it into the database model. So this operator allows me to do that. So let's say initially I take ID. So this dot ID is what it's going to access, this particular ID over here, and I'm storing this value of whatever the ID input the user gave into this ID over here. So it's a little bit different. It might be a bit confusing for people who haven't worked with parameterized constructors before, but this is how parameterized constructors work. Parameterized constructors are basically constructors that look like this, but you've just added parameters into the particular constructor. So that's how it looks, and this is how you can access or store values into a parameterized constructor using this operator. People who have knowledge with competitive programming or programming in general would have already gone through this. So I'm also going to just set the title in the similar manner. So it's just gonna set it in the same way, that is, this dot title is accessing this title over here, and this title is accessing this particular title value over here. And then the next one I'm going to do is this dot description, and I'm going to store it in the description of this particular parameterized constructor. Then we're going to write this dot date not of the note added is going to be stored in date of the note added as well. So this basically finishes the usage of our parameterized constructor. And the next thing we're going to define is basically a get ID, that is a particular function that returns the ID for us so that we can, let's say, put it into the parameterized constructor or anywhere basically. So we're just gonna call a public string because I might need to use it somewhere later on. So get ID, and then we are going to go ahead and just quickly make a return statement for it. So it's going to be return, and then we're going to return the ID, right? So yeah, this should do it. So this is going to be your get ID. The next function that we need is a public void set ID, which is going to help us set the ID as well. So if you have a get ID, generally in databases you also have a set particular for that as well. So if you have a get something, you have to set it as well. So this is another thing that we use as a functionality in databases. String, and obviously we're going to set the ID, so it's going to be a string ID itself. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the ID, so we're going to have to take this operator, in this case dot ID, to set the value to this particular ID over here, right? So that does that. And okay, I think we need to apply a semicolon over here. Okay, now let's come to the public title as well. So we're going to obviously take a public string because title is a string, ID was not a string. We're going to get the title initially just the same way, title, get it, and then set it. So we're going to get the title, and then obviously in the get there is no requirement for any parameterization, there's no requirement for any arguments, and then we're just going to return a title value right over there. Okay, I'm just going to give it a bit of spacing so you can understand it when you view. So the next thing that you need after getting it, can anybody say, it would obviously be setting the title. So public, again string, because now you're going to return a string only. But no, I'm sorry, you're not returning a string, you're just assigning values, you're not returning anything here, so you don't have to return a string, you can just return a void, and you're going to set the title, and we are going to take a string, we're going to call it title, and then we're going to open up the function, we're going to take this operator, we're going to do the setting the title, so this dot title, and then we're going to equal to the title. This is just to set it individually. And okay, great, now we have the description and the date not added left. So if you want, you can just copy paste this entire functionality, because it's going to be string void for the description and the date not added as well, because we've saved it as strings. So it might show up a lot of errors because so you just have to change the get title to, let's say, get description, and set description as well. You guys don't have to worry while coding, Android Studio is really going to help you out in most of these cases. You can take get data not added and set data not added. Yeah. Okay, so you can see now all the errors have been gone, but there is a little bit of a difference here. It's obviously not title returning while you're getting the description. You want to return the description, right? So let's just do that. So you want to return the description, and I would want to obviously not take a string title here, I would want to take a string description. I would want to take this operator dot description, and I would want to do that on description itself. And same with the gets note added, I wouldn't want to return title, I would want to return the get note added. I'm sorry, I would obviously not want to return anything else except the date of the note added, and I would want to set the note added for the title of again note added, date of the note added, and this dot again using the same date of the note added is going to be equal to the date of the note added of this particular function that we just defined here. So with this, most of the pretty much all the code that we required for the model of this particular class is there. We have default, we have defined the parameterized, we have defined all the functionalities for setting and getting each variable in this note model, and with that the note model is done. Now let's go back to the main activity, and if you see here now, most of the errors that was showing up with title is going to be removed. So I'm just going to come here. You're saying that there wasn't something like this, but right now there is no error, and that is just because we have said everything. So there is literally not much of a error for it to show up, right? So that is something else which was required, and it is there now, so it won't be a problem coming up, whenever you're moving forward, right? Okay, you can see a get node added over here, which is an that, and I will get back to you. Okay, guys, so the problem was I had, but what I needed to actually use was data, because I am adding the data. It was not the date, the mistake, but where I was figuring it. So now there are no errors on your so data in class, and it just used to get instead of date pretty well. Let's move on. Next class that about is the list. Here, normally I wouldn't. So let's take about the T classes against the compact, and you just look at the clear view. There is a floating action button as well inside a constraint layout. If you don't know about recycler view, it's just something not really, if you even if you just check your Swiggy app, you can see that there is always you can just keep scrolling down. The basic example of a recycler view. So that is how this is going to look, and you saw the example in the demo video initially as well. So for a recycler view, we're not going to type out the whole code because recycler view has a lot of code. We define the basics, and I will tell you about the rest later. So we're going to have a recycler view adapter, and it's going to be called a recycler view. We're going to have a database helper, seen a little earlier in the main activity. So database helper, we're going to have a list which is going to store a note model, which is the page, and are also note listed out, and we a floating action button because we had defined it in the activity. If I just showed you the activity right now, we had defined it in the activity. So fab, we're going to call it fab. Then we're going to use a alert dialog in this case as well, because obviously we have to give the option for the user to save over here as well. So here also you need the alert dialog, and we're going to use builder, and then we're going to store it as a builder variable, and then we're going to use alert dialog, and we're going to type in dialog as that particular variable. We're going to write a button for the saving. So it's obviously again here again, once the dialog pops up, you need a save button. So it's also going to be something like this. Okay, and in last and finally, we're going to have the text for the title and the description. So it's again going to be private edit text, title text, and we're going to have description text. Okay, so we have defined everything that is required, and now we're just going to go to the onCreate method. So there's no so that I could show in a minute, right? Because of the time constraint that we have for this video, I'm just going to write the whole code for this, and I will start explaining what everything means. Okay, guys. So the entire this is what missions that we have done, and this is the by itself. To everything done, this is the rest of predo as well. So all the initializing a list for the array, so for the node. So this is how the list recycler view is basically kind of advanced looking list. So we are just defining that, again defining the database helper, getting full lists in the everything in the list, so that it goes through each note. And these are all the adapters. There is an adapter which kind of allows us to connect the recycler view with the list, and this is just me setting up all the data for that. And if any change is done in the note, I want you to just notify it as soon as you can in the list view itself. So that will be shown over here. And this pop up in over and just evidence that is that if the note is view that is, and same and all that. So this two different have different functionality. Open it up just to show you guys how it works. I'll just how this how much can do to impact. This is what exists, and it's pretty much the same syntax for any kind of view. The adapters are gonna say. Obviously, we can't go through this entire code very like and just show that kind of like define a list. This is activity load looks, and this you have to have kilobytes. What is it? I've showed you. So this is that way for basic file look, or how the list should look. I'm just gonna say recycler view, but you guys just have to imagine like this thing repeating how many ever times you add the node, right? So that's basically the list. So I've added a card view which is blue in color just to make it look. You can change the colors over here, obviously. I've added the title text, the description, the date. This is option that is going to be able to share data. You can, when you click on this button, it will be allowing you to update the data, and when you click on this, it's going to delete the data. So this again just defines the recycler item layout for this particular recycler view, and this is how you can it's going to look. You can change the functionality by changing the color or changing the title format or the font or anything. It will change how it lists out, because I have used this as my recycler item layout. Now, let's come to pretty much the most important thing of this particular program. I'm going to use the SQL queries and the commands. So again, this code is not too difficult. It's just quite lengthy because we have a lot of functionalities, but I'll just try and get through most of these together, right? So we're obviously just defining a class known as database helper and extending a SQLite open helper, which is again predefined in Android Studio, so you don't have to create any class for it. It's already there on Android Studio. So when you're typing it itself, it's just going to come. And what I've done here is I'm not going to be able to write the entire code for you. Like I said, it's a very long task. Even though I know everything and I'll be able to explain it to you guys, it's just going to take a lot of time for me to code the entire thing by hand. So that's why I pre-did it, so that I can just explain it and just not just save you guys some time, but also you'll be able to understand it hopefully. So I've just defined a string name for everything. So the database name, that is the entire database itself, totally where all the data is stored, I'm just calling it, let's say, notes or note. This has to be very importantly, you have to make sure that all the things that you define is correctly done. And now I've defined the table name as a note table. I have defined the column as a ID, that is the first column ID, second column title, third column description, and the fourth column as the time added. So all of these are going to be taken from the user, and it's going to display it over here. So I'm sorry, here. So it's going to display it over here. And how is it going to display? In this kind of a way, right? So this thing is going to be one particular item, and it's going to have all those items, right? How many ever times that you have inputted it. And so this is all the data that I need, and this is me just defining it in the database. The name of the database is note. The table name is note table. The first column is ID, title, description, and added respectively. And this is a database helper function that you have to call. Again, predefined syntax. You can find it anywhere online. If you're following a tutorial, 100% is going to be there. Database helper. this is another constructor based on this particular class, and it's kind of parameterized because for this context, right? And this is going to allow you to use, if you're going to define an object for this constructor, it's going to allow you to use pretty much all the functionalities of this class. And in the onCreate method, you can see that I have just said that, if there is no table, I want to obviously create it, right? So how do you create it? So it's going to be create a baby table, or that's just me defining the name for it. Create table, and then plus table name, and then it's going to be the bracket, it's going to be the column 1, 2, 3, and 4, and each data type for that particular column. So what is table underscore name? It's basically what I defined over here, node table. So it's going to say I want to create a table which is called node table, with the first column. This bracket is very important because that's basically just opening the bracket and closing the bracket. You can see this, how it's closing over here, is closing in the last string value that I've put here. So create a table, node table, first column, which is a second column, which is title, which is a third, which is a description, which is text, and fourth, which is a time added, which is a long. You can change the data type depending upon your situation, but it's going to pretty much follow the same format. If you have more number of columns, you just put plus and you just keep adding it, right? Now this is another syntax for the DB. So DB is going to store the functionalities of your SQLite database. And where did I get that from? It comes on your onCreate method over here. So DB is going to allow you to store it in the database, or basically just execute the SQL query. So this is your query right here, and db.xsql is going to basically execute that particular query for you. Now void on upgrade is this functionality is just saying that if a table exists, I want you to drop that particular table. That is, as soon as I'm creating the database, if this particular table is already created, this you can't create two tables with the same name, right? So if this particular table already exists, I want you to drop that table, right? So that is this functionality over here. And add item is where you can add to the database, which is basically what's going to happen when you click on the edit button, and then you click on you just fill in the title, the description, and the save button is added to the database using this. So again, I've defined an SQLite DB get writable database so that you can write it, and then I have just taken the values from content values, and I've gotten the title, I've gotten the description, I've taken the information of the time from the Java system as well. This is again predefined code which will allow you to use a timestamp, java.lang.system.current time in millis, and you can just it will take it up till the milliseconds, and you can store that in your column 4, which is basically time. And that using db.insert because I'm inserting it in, and I've used the table name and I've used the values. So this is the values and this is the table underscore name, right? Inserting into this table name values, these values right here. And if it's successful, it will show you, okay. Constructor that we've used here, which we have already defined over here, we're just using that over here. As you guys can see, we have just used that particular constructor over here, and we have defined a lot of stuff here. It's just saying that I want you to add stuff into the database, into the note, and I'm using a lot of functionalities that I've used over here, and I'm just setting the description, the title, using the cursor for each particular note. So this is gonna if the cursor is not equal to null, basically says as long as the I have a note here. So let's say this is the first one, second one, third one, and that's it. There are only 3 nodes. So once it reaches the third one, then the value of your cursor is going to be null. So it's going to come out of this if statement and it's going to end. So until it becomes null, it's going to keep going and going. So what is edition? It's going to set the date for you, and that is basically this piece of code here. And this basically says if it is not at the end of the program, that is if it is not at the last code, which is something that you have to do either way. If the cursor is not at the, as an example, I'm just saying if there are 3 nodes, if the cursor is not on the third one, if it is not on the second one, as long as it is not equal to null, basically I want you to the cursor only becomes null when it is pretty much at the end of the program. So if the cursor is not null, I want you to move it to the first. Wherever it is, I just want you to move to the first, right? And then we have the rest of the code, which is the note model, and all this functionalities of me setting the time and the date for each each note, and it's gonna loop through for until the cursor is going to null, right? And that is that. Now if I want to view it, uh, again similar functionality, move to the first, and I'm setting the I've already set the IDs and everything over here. Initially I'm adding a list to it so that now I can show it in the list, and I have again set a date node added, which is again coming from this particular model, and I have just used a while loop to make sure that it loops from one node to the next, and I'm trying to and that's what this functionality just does. I'm just trying to show all the items, get all the items, right? Now if I want to update the items, I can go one by one and just use all these pieces of code here. Again, just basically using the basic functionalities of SQL to update anything that you have in the node. So if I just click on this particular pen button over here, it's going to allow me to update, right? So that's basically just me saying that as soon as the pen button or that particular icon is clicked, I want you to execute this piece of code, which is going to get me a writable SQL data. It's going to take the table name, it's going to take the column, it's going to take every column, and it's going to allow me to add so this is the delete function of that, but to update, right? So this is all using db.update, very straightforward. And you can just copy this. So all you have to know is there is going to be a db.update for updating, there's going to be a db.delete for deleting, and in there's going to be everything valid. It's going to be a insert so that each piece of code, the item delete from the click button, automatic close this to the again just for call later on over here, just show value, select start, let's say on the show, as you want. So this is this particular database, and this is the most important part of the program, because SQLite of the other Java files we've really used SQLite because these are all trying to get correct. I have written a lot of the model functionalities of the description that I'm going to be using over here as you know a lot in this particular this class at least. So this is the database helper that we have, and this is the functionalities that I have just stated for this particular class, and that is how the database helper is going to be. Now I'm just going to do the program one more time. I'm just going to run it for you guys on my Android device so that you guys can see it over there. So I'm just going to open up my Android device for you guys as soon as it runs. Okay guys, so the app started perfectly, and like I said, if you have no notes, this is the first screen that's going to come. You can add the title. I'm going to add the title of, like I said earlier, okay, let's take NBA, let's write LeBron, and I just click on save. It's going to save the note, and as soon as it's saved, it's going to take me to the next particular uh, note section, and I have the option to delete these particular notes. I'm going to add another item. Let's just do it again, NBA, and let's say Kobe this time. I might have spelled that wrong. So you can see now NBA of Kobe and NBA of LeBron both have been displayed because LeBron was there earlier. I'm just going to add one more. Let's write song Drake and save that. Again, song Travis, and just save that. I want to show you, type in anything just to show you that functionality. So I'm just going to add one more. Okay, so now you can see I'm able to scroll up and down, right? So this is why also says this functionality just comes inbuilt with pre-secular views as well. So this is how you can basically do all the functionalities and use a database like SQLite, which is the most popular offline database. This is offline database again. It might seem like a lot of work, but trust me, one program by yourself, this is just going to get a lot easy, because you can literally just copy this entire code for pretty much all the programs and just change it. Like if you have one more thing, like if you have a a type artist name or something like that, you can just add another string like that. You don't have to do that here, but you can just do that if you have one more functionality. But basically that's the point. You can do such stuff, and you can use the same kind of code for doing the same functionalities, but for different programs, for different applications. You can just change the code according to the application. And if you just do one, so it might be very, beginners, it might be very intimidating, because what is all this, it's very complex. But if you just use this or follow this entire session, and just watch a couple of tutorials on, if you just be able to do this by yourself. And trust me, if you just do this by yourself once, you should be able to solve any kind of SQLite problem, because I just did this once and I'm still able to do any problem that comes up with it, right? Okay, great. So this is going to be the end of the session for today. I want to thank everybody that has joined this particular YouTube session, and I hope you guys were able to understand most of the concept that I was trying to teach you guys in today's session. If you guys have any doubts, obviously please keep asking it in the chat sections and in the live chat as well. And I hope you guys were able to understand most of it, which is the most that's the most important thing for us as a chapter. And we have a I hope you guys were just able to understand most of the concepts. So this, again, the session was brought to you by SIAM VIT, and thank you for joining this session.